let me just give you a quick summary. In effect, what Dick has shown you can be done with virtually every building that we've ever been in, any building that he's ever walked in. Our current estimate is that any building we entered, including this one and brand new ones, you can probably save a minimum of 20%, a maximum of 60, 70% of the energy that's currently being used by simply designing and installing the kind of energy efficiency systems we're talking about. But let's look at this in terms of another piece of this equation, which is district heating. About a year ago, I got approached by the Swedish ambassador, who for a variety of reasons I knew, and he said the following: we in Sweden, 50% of all of our heating systems in our cities and towns use district heating, hot water, distributed hot water district heating. People don't have furnaces in their houses or in their buildings anymore. They're being heated off of a centralized heating system. And we don't understand why you guys aren't doing this in North America, particularly given your oil dependency. This is what a district energy heating system, BizCat is a company we're working with in Sweden, looks like. You basically can collect heat from a variety of sources. You want to take all the waste heat you can get your hands on, which is currently being thrown away, and use it. You can provide new waste heat or new heat through biofuels and other sources. You connect residential, industrial, family buildings. What you can use as heat sources are everything from waste heat, which is the best, paper mills, power plants that are throwing most of their energy away. You can use fossil fuel peak loads. You can use sources from power plants, combined heat and power. You can use biofuels. You can use geothermal. One of the more interesting things that Dick alluded to is that in a community that has all these oversized boilers and furnaces, you can frequently turn off a large fraction of the existing boilers, use the remaining boilers more optimally, run them more flat out. Boilers work better when they're running flat out and not at 50% capacity. So you want to run them flat out. You turn off a bunch of the ones that are running under capacity, hook up the whole system so you run the fewer that you have on and run them at full capacity. So on the outside, what you have is a production plant or a source of waste heat. You make hot water, 160 degree or whatever, you run it through insulated pipe, bury it in the ground. You can bury it 60 centimeters down. It doesn't need to be below frost line. These are heavily insulated steel pipe. You run the water down the center of the street or down the sidewalk in front of all the buildings. It comes out hot, it comes into the pipe and by the buildings hot. It goes through heat exchangers, those gray guys sitting outside the buildings. It takes the heat out of the water and pumps it into the heating system in the building, and then you send it back to be reheated. This is what a building system looks like. The water comes in, district heating supply, goes through a heat exchanger, two heat exchangers. One heats the building, the second heats the water that you drink and take baths in, and then it goes back as cooler water back to the system to be reheated. Inside the building, again, it's the heat exchanger. It goes into the heat distribution system in the building. This is what the pipe looks like. Insulated pipe. This is two-pipe insulated pipe, so there's a feed and a return. This is what it looks like if you install it on the surface in Sweden. This is what it looks like if you're going to bury it. I mean, you have whole entire communities that have this stuff. This is all they have to heat the buildings. Here's a pretty good-sized piece of pipe. Dick, how far can you ascend this stuff at 160 degrees?
160 degrees, you can go up to 35 miles with somewhere between 6 and 8% loss of BTUs.
35 miles.
And again, getting back to the steam question, hot water is just great stuff. The steam, the reason it was so popular in the 1890s was you didn't need pumps, and we had very primitive pumps. We just pressurized the whole system. With hot water, we have pumps, but they're really efficient pumps. And the latent heat of water is really working for you. And so this is just, and the other thing about it doesn't have to be a loop. You can just have a dendritic kind of layout of the piping, because each pipe has a supply and a return.
All right, single pipe installed in the ground. Again, the double pipes, you can see what the stuff looks like. The welding is actually quite a sophisticated operation. The welders need to be trained to do this because you can't burn off the insulation when you're welding the steel together. You actually, the pipes are charged with water at the proper temperature while they're being welded so that they don't expand or contract in the weld when you're actually running hot water through them. So it's a pretty sophisticated operation. We're going to end up with a lot of very smart and sophisticated welders in America. Very interesting and challenging jobs that we're first going to have to train with a bunch of Swedes coming over and teaching us how to do it. Heat exchangers in buildings, we'll skip that. Here's a heat exchanger. You can see the size of something. This is in a big, large commercial building. Again, in a large commercial building. Here's a home heat exchanger. This is all you need for a house. This is it. No more furnace, okay? No more hot water heater. This is it. Takes care of the whole house. Now, one of the wonderful features of this, we're looking at a bunch of communities. Dick will get into one. We'll show you what it looks like. One of the wonderful features of this, the Swedes came over. We took them to a bunch of cities and towns up in the north. You want to go to places that are oil dependent because gas is cheap and it's hard even with something as sophisticated and efficient as this to compete with gas prices right now. But if you're on oil, this can be a quarter of the price of oil heat. So you go to parts of North America that are oil dependent and are not going to get gas anytime soon that can use wood. The thing that the Swedes jumped about was in Sweden, they've been doing this for so long that most of the buildings that are on these district energy systems do not have furnaces or boilers. All they have are heat exchangers and the district system. What that means is the system has to be sized to meet the coldest day of the year and keep every building warm. In the US, where we already have furnaces and boilers in every building, they can be the peaking source. And we can design a system that's for the 90% coldest day, which is a dramatic cost saving over dealing with every cold day. And just simply contract with a bunch of you that own the furnaces and turn them on as the peaking units to feed additional heat into the system when we need it. So we actually have embedded in our system, because of the waste we had over the years, a system that saves us a lot on peaking costs. And that's going to be an interesting feature.
Let me just make one point about that, because this is an amazing number. When we're backing up, when we're putting up...
I'm sorry. You've got to turn the mic on.
Yeah, I'll turn it on.
There we go. Can you hear me?
Yep.
So when we put in a biomass system into a building with an existing oil boiler, the typical way that an engineer will tell you is you should design the system for the peak load. And we say, no. If you design the system for 50 or even 40% of peak load, guess what proportion of the time the biomass system will run over the whole year and take the running time? Take a guess.
90%.
Right? 92 to 96% of the time. So you save a lot of money because you don't have to buy this huge boiler. You're buying a much smaller boiler. And then you're just using your existing boiler as a peaker. And even, we had one school that just absolutely required us to put in a 100% redundant oil boiler. And that was 5 years ago, and it hasn't run once. It was more expensive than the biomass system. So this is what we're talking about.
All right, now, this is what the family heat exchanger looks like for a family unit. Just to show you how this unfolds in a city in Sweden. Here's the city, Kristianstad, in 1980. You can see the little purple pipe there. That was the beginning of a district energy system. The wonderful thing about district energy, hot water district energy systems, is you can build them incrementally. You can slowly start to connect the rest of the town piece by piece by piece. At this point, they were 100% dependent on oil, no biofuels, 1980. 1990, 8% biofuels. They have a gas boiler, they have a biogas boiler. And you can see the district energy system in 1990. 2006, they're 98% biofuels. They've eliminated oil from the mix. The whole community is now, well, you can see the community, it's all been piped together. And probably doing, wood chips, you can see the sources of the power. Probably doing it at something on the order of a quarter to a third of the cost of what they used to pay for oil.
And what's the reduction in their carbon footprint then by doing this over the?
By going to wood rather than oil? Well, you remember Dick's original carbon bubble?
Could you repeat the question?
Okay, the question.
Oh, I'm sorry, the question
Yeah.
was, what's their carbon effect, what's the carbon effect of going
I
to this?
understand the saving of money, what's it doing in terms of showing them that they're reducing their carbon footprint?
Right. Well, wood isn't totally carbon free. Okay, remember when that little thing that showed 4,000 pounds per 1,000 gallons? The reason for that is that you gotta harvest it. You gotta use a chainsaw and a truck and a feller buncher and so forth and so on to create the chips or the pellets. But again, depending on the sort of philosophical conversation we were having earlier about, how much CO2 does wood really add, my sense is that you're probably reducing the carbon footprint by 80 to 85%.
Does that include having dug all the,
Oh, now you're getting,
places and
yeah.
creating the pipe that they put in there?
Well, the thing about that pipe,
Is there a real obvious balance that they calculated between continuing to try to get the most efficiency out of what they already had versus the cradle to grave of the new technology?
right. In Sweden's case, they made essentially a foreign policy decision that they saw themselves being at the total mercy of Middle Eastern oil. And they made that decision in the late 70s after the embargo and said, we want to be independent, we got a lot of wood in this country and we're smart and we can figure out how to maximize the use of waste heat. If you take an electric plant that's say burning coal or oil or nuclear or whatever, they're throwing away, 62 plus 66, 68% of the energy in the form of heat, okay? And you see cooling towers and you have heated rivers and you get all kinds of stuff. If we could just capture that and use it year round, that heat, that energy has essentially a zero carbon footprint because you've already counted it once in the process of generation. So you heard a lot about CHP, which is combined heat and power. That's a system where you're generating electricity and you're using the heat for thermal applications. So in a place like Boston, where you have a lot of natural gas that's cheap, on a campus like this, if you went to hot water, put in a gas-fired CHP system, you could probably generate a good chunk of your own electricity and heat your buildings and do it as what we call a heat-led system so that you would only generate electricity when you needed the heat. And then because it's much cheaper to buy it off the grid in the summer. But that's a whole other story.
Question here? Question there. Yeah, go ahead.
If the entire planet went this direction, is there enough wood, or will we denude the planet?
Well, remember, one of the keys, the question is there enough wood to do this if you ran everything on wood, if the whole planet went this way? I don't know if we have an answer to that yet, but what we're looking at, the community we would show you if we have enough time, would be run largely off of waste heat, off of what you're producing in a paper mill and a local power plant. What you're going to do to start is grab all the waste locations that you can get where the energy is already being used and wasted in other ways. When you actually have to supplement it with wood or natural gas or other sources, you're going to have to start to do that math. You're still going to end up better off in a carbon footprint. Whether there's enough wood, Dick thinks there's enough wood to practically do anything in the world as far as I can tell, because we're going to haul it down on trains from Quebec. But my view on this right now is the opportunity simply to harvest what is not being used efficiently would allow us to probably deal with a large proportion of the oil-dependent northern New England and have a very modest dent on wood capacity in the region in terms of chip and pellet use.
Yeah, I would say that the first thing you do is drop the demand, okay? We're wasting, we know from the Sankey charts I showed you that we're wasting about 60% of the energy even before it gets to you. We're wasting another 50% at least in the buildings when it gets to you. So that's, you know, close to 75 to 80% of the primary energy is being wasted. And we need to harvest that first. And all we need to do from a climate change standpoint is get back to the energy we were using in the 60s. If we were using the same amount of energy we were using in the 60s, the overall climate change would level off and start coming down. And so what I'm just saying is don't look at this as a supply problem, look at it as a demand reduction problem, and we can get a long way there. As far as wood goes, I'm not advocating just wood. I mean, solar thermal would work beautifully in this, and we'll show you a couple more slides. But the basic point here is we're setting up a thermal market. We're having the ability to sell your waste heat back to the thermal loop, okay? So if you have a computer room that you cool in this university 365 days a year, right now, you're just dumping that heat to the atmosphere. If you could capture that heat in an air-to-water heat pump, you could sell it back to the grid or use it for heating in other parts of the building. And that would do a tremendous amount in dropping your energy needs.
We have two questions up there, but let me just add a thought to this. One of the challenges and one of the interesting issues that Joan's question raises, how do you take this to scale, is that there are a variety of market imperfections that discourage you from doing energy efficiency. One of them is if you're a tenant and your landlord is in charge of the building's heating systems and bills you for heat and power, you have no way of fixing the building, even though you're paying the bills. And the landlord has no incentive to fix the building because you're paying the bills, so why do they care? One of the things that's actually quite interesting about these district energy systems is that they can create an incentive where if we put in something like this, all of a sudden, whether you're the landlord or the tenant, you have a powerful incentive to use less. You're paying for heat. If you can use less, you actually buy less heat. If you can pump heat into the system from waste in your computer room or whatever, you're actually going to get paid for it. So you create an incentive system that actually rewards whoever has control over the system, whether it's a landlord or a tenant. Question up here, yeah, and question over there. Yes?
Selfish individual question. My house has a combination of gas-fired hot water, and I have a wood-burning stove. I get my wood from my yard and from all around me because there are enough down trees that I cut them myself or somebody else cuts them. I split them myself. It's a pretty efficient wood stove. Am I better off? I mean, in terms of carbon and what we're talking about environmentally, I'm not even talking about the money. Am I better off using the wood stove more often and gas heat less because I get the wood locally and the whole business you were just talking about?
I would say cautiously yes. If you have a backyard boiler that's cranking out all kinds of particulates and driving your neighbors nuts, that's not so good. If you have a really efficient stove that has a good emissions profile, yeah, absolutely. You can use wood in many different ways just as long as the emissions profiles are reasonable given where you're living.
Question over here.
With the waste heat being used in this way, maybe a key transportation sector as well. But in other words, if you can't really, I don't think any other way capture the waste heat that each individual car gives off. But if we convert to electric vehicles, and then so the power plant there is generating electricity for the vehicles, and then district heating is then capturing that waste heat as well.
The question is, can you do something about transportation off of a system like this? Actually, we have a transportation thing coming up. I've got a whole bunch of other ideas about what the solutions are in transportation. I don't think this is necessarily going to help you at all on transportation, other than the key here is that these, another way to think about it is these district energy systems are going to work where you have compact development. Cities, town centers, places where people are relatively well-defined areas. They're not gonna work, you're not gonna run insulated welded pipe. You could run it 20 miles across the countryside, but you're not gonna run it 20 miles to serve 4 houses. So you're gonna do downtowns, you're gonna do town centers, you're gonna do neighborhoods. By definition, as Joan knows better than anyone, those communities are also much more transportation efficient because walking is an option. You can get a quart of milk without getting in a car. Your kids can walk to school. All sorts of alternative means of getting around, including biking and walking, are viable. These communities that will benefit from district energy will also be much more transportation efficient by design and by definition. Yes, sir.
Isn't there currently steam in the, underneath the city streets? Where's that coming from and what's it going to?
Yeah, there are steam systems. Veolia owns the steam system in Boston. Now, there are steam systems in a bunch of our major cities. New York has one below 96th Street, old, pretty dilapidated. There's one in Boston, old, leaks a lot. There was a big steam pipe in the basement of our building at the Conservation Law Foundation, which the basement was unbelievably hot because the pipe was in the street right outside and literally heated the wall. Yes, there are a bunch of them out there. The other problem that, the question about why water rather than steam that Dick didn't mention, steam's dangerous. I mean, you got a lot of problems. When one of those pipes goes, you cause a lot of scary harm to anyone that's in the vicinity. I mean, it is really nasty, and it's hard to manage. It's hard to protect against that stuff. These steam systems are a thing of the past, in my view. We are still using them. There was an effort to try to figure out how to use New York's better. There's certainly Boston's is used. You probably don't abandon them anytime soon if they're embedded, the infrastructure's there. But you're not going to install any new ones. Yes, sir, and then over here. 2 questions, yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm a little confused on the conversion of fuel in a power plant. And let's say it's gas-fired and you have waste of 60%. Let's say it's even a fairly efficient one.
Yep.
It's just because the nature of converting that fuel into electricity is not that efficient, and therefore you get the 60% loss.
Yes. The electric power plant, by definition, in the conversion of whatever fuel it's using, nuclear, coal, gas, oil, wood, anything it burns, by design, if you're lucky, you get 35% of the energy, usually more like 30% of the energy into usable electricity out the other side. The rest of it, 60, 65, 70% of it is heat, because you're making steam. The power plant basically makes steam, does all the stuff that Dick talked about in terms of making water into steam. That steam is blown through a turbine. Basically, what a jet engine or anything else, blown through a turbine, spins the turbine makes electricity. That steam can be used a second time. A combined cycle power plant tries to use it twice, use it a different way, and then it gets recycled or cooled. You have to cool it down to make it water, blah, 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 and then you run it back through. And you throw all that heat away. Nuclear power plants, you gotta cool them to keep them from doing all the nasty things.
It's really
it is in the physics of making electricity.
So
yes.
You end up with a lot of waste.
And you end up with a lot of waste. Now, to the degree you capture that heat, combined heat and power plants, we got one built, we helped build one years ago next to the Stonyfield yogurt plant in New Hampshire to make yogurt with the hot water heat and then send it back as cool water. And if you capture and use that water, the plant becomes much more efficient. Don't throw it away. Don't emit it into the atmosphere. Don't pump it into a river. The same with a paper mill or anything else that's generating power. Claim the heat, use it in this kind of system or use it for some other useful purpose. And then you can get the efficiencies up. The more with that heat you use and fully utilize, the more the efficiency rises. It goes to 60%, 70%. You can get 90% if you use all the heat. Yes, ma'am?
I'm not sure whether, because Christiansted did this incrementally, has there any community that's ever buried their electric grid at the same time they've done this repiping?
Oh, yeah. The question is if you ever buried the electric grid. You could, if you dig all these pipes, you can pump the lines underground too. The electric companies hate doing that by mandate, but
it enhances your
once the ground's open, you can drop it in presumably. It's an interesting suggestion. a question there, and then I want Dick to show you the community, because I want to at least show you what a system like this in New England would look like, literally around the corner. Yes, sir.
Salem, Mass is putting in a gas-fired
Correct.
power plant.
To replace the coal plant, or Salem Harbor. Yeah.
Is there any CHP involved with that, do you know?
Not at the moment. There should be. It's in a neighborhood, or near a neighborhood. You could, and you're gonna have to, again, you'll have to pipe, you'll have to, but anytime you have a power plant sitting in a community like that, it is an opportunity to build such a system.
Why do you suppose they don't grab on that?
Because the power companies are power companies.
Enough said.
Enough said. By the way, there is a good example of this, right, sitting in Boston. It's the Kendall Square power plant, or the power plant that's across the Charles River, the brick one, pretty attractive looking building that's on the other side of the Charles River in Cambridge, near Kendall Square. That one used to discharge its waste heat into the Charles River and caused no end of trouble in the basin. And that heat is now being captured and used for some district heating, I believe, in Cambridge. So that's going on right now. Dick's going to show you an example in New England of a small city in New Hampshire that we want to do this in.
Only a handful more slides. Better turn my cell phone. Hold on a second. So what can you do with district heating? You can capture waste heat. You can operate existing systems more efficiently because you've networked them. You have created a net thermal metering system. This is really important. We all know, can you hear me okay? We all know about net metering for electricity, but we haven't done net metering for thermal. And what this does, it creates an incentive for the building owner to tighten up their building and sell their excess capacity back to the loop. And if you look at this university, for instance, I am just positive you're just blowing a whole lot of energy into the air. And being able to see that is really important. And then as time allows, you can transfer the system to renewable energies as the economics work to your advantage. So solar thermal has a lot of potential in this neck of the woods, where Austria and Germany are big time in the solar thermal. We're much better in terms of insolation here in New England than any of those European countries, because they're a lot further north than us. Wait a minute, let's try this. Okay. All right, so this is a typical rural town in New England. This is a real thing. Has about 7 million square feet of commercial and industrial. We think we can start with a 2-mile loop in the downtown area and serve 1 million square feet to start with. It's easily expanded, and the beauty of it is it has a paper mill in the downtown that is burning 1.8 million gallons of fuel a year. And if we can just harvest like 40% of that through heat pumps, we can probably heat the whole downtown. And then 50% of the residential population of this community lives in the downtown area, so it's very compact.
Which town is this?
I'm not telling you. As a friend of mine once said, I hope I have made myself sufficiently obscure. But this is the profile of residential energy use in this town. 79% of the buildings are on oil, propane, or kerosene. So here's the town, and we've sort of drawn a line around where we want to start. The arrow over here on the left-hand corner is the paper mill. You can see the river running through it. And then there's the major commercial areas down here. And this is City Hall over here. And as you can see, it's compact, mostly masonry buildings. The whole area has a perimeter of about 1.5 miles. We think 2 miles of pipe will do the trick. This is what the Swedes told us to do. If you take a look at this, you can see the yellow dotted lines. Can people see those all right? Yeah. Those are what we call islands. And we can start out with this island in the lower left-hand, and lower part says 3.5 gigawatt hours a year. That's heat, okay, not electricity. You can transfer heat into megawatts. That would be the first island. Then we connect with the next ones. You can see the lines. this pipe up in the upper left-hand corner is going over the paper mill. We've got 2 minutes left. And then eventually we can extend it down to the school system. So the town's very excited about this. And then we can expand it. This is the area up in the right-hand corner that I was showing you. But there's a big trash-to-energy plant down here that's generating 5 megawatts or 10 megawatts an hour of heat. Foundry, other commercial areas. So, last slide, things to remember. Reduce consumption, optimize usage, and this allows you to keep these petrodollars circulating in the state. All of these oil dollars that we're spending in New Hampshire go out of state in 1 week, and we only keep about 13% in the state. When you switch over to these district heating systems, you're keeping that amount of money back in the community, and it rotates 4 to 7 times before it leaves the state. So I calculate in this town, the town's spending about $40 million a year on oil. That's the businesses and the residential and so this helps to really give the economy a big kick and preserve and create jobs and strengthen New Hampshire. New Hampshire, statewide, spends about $1.5 billion a year on number 2 heating oil. That's, our energy use is about 7% of the gross domestic product of the state. Yep.
Yeah, how does the utilities feel about this? They don't have great. How do they feel about this plan?
Well, it's a really interesting question. And,
It's a great last question. Okay.
Oh, I have 0 minutes left, so can I impose on your generosity to answer the question? The problem with the utilities is, by and large, in New Hampshire, we have mostly electric utilities. We have about 140,000 customers on natural gas. They're not too worried because it's so cheap right now. The last place you would start one of these things is where natural gas existed. So we're reaching out to those communities. This community is 50 miles from the nearest natural gas pipeline. Ain't getting natural gas ever, okay? Just not gonna happen. So this is a great place to pilot this. We can buy waste heat from these companies way below the price of even natural gas. And so you can do a market-based system with investors to essentially build these systems and not have to float a bond in the local community, which is a big plus. And the other thing is, it's not subject to public utility regulation because we're still competing against propane, oil, gas, wood, and it's voluntary for someone to participate.
So my answer to your question is the electric utility doesn't really care. People aren't heating electricity much, so that's not a non-issue. The gas utilities aren't in this space, so they don't care. The people that care are going to be the oil dealers who want to sell you oil instead of having you go off oil. And so that's where the battleground will be fought, is going to be with oil. But that's where it should be fought. That's where you have a huge opportunity and a huge cost center.
The other big advantage here that people don't think about is by going to a district energy system that's based on local domestic fuels of many types, you stabilize the price of energy. You know, the price of wood is not going to quadruple overnight, and ditto waste energy and so forth and so on. So that's very important to municipalities and school districts. You know, they don't care how much they pay; they just want to know what they're going to pay. Because if energy prices double in the middle of the budget year, and they're stuck, they got to lay people off because you can't go back to the taxpayers and say, "Oh, gee, sorry guys, so you need a surcharge to, pay for our energy."
All right, we got to finish. Thank you all.
Yes, thank you very much.
Before you leave, I want to thank you all for having been here and being part of the conversation. I also would like to invite you to next week's presentation by Dave Titley, who has been until fairly recently Rear Admiral in the Navy, and one of the people who have been instrumental in warming up the military establishment to the climate change issue. These are issues not only surrounding their own fuel use and emissions, but also very importantly security issues surrounding food security, water security, migration and the like, for which the military establishment has to prepare itself. He's one of the key thinkers and leaders in that area, and no doubt this will promise to be yet another very exciting presentation. So until then, have a good night.